Hello. So I'm going to start with a confession, which is that I chose the title of this talk specifically to associate myself with Kenny Loggins. So please have that song in your head while I talk. So a lot of the speakers today have mentioned this term, engagement. And it's one that's really central to the work I do. And the first point I really want to make is that when I talk about engagement, it's something that's very different from participation. Most of my work has been in the health behavior change space, and oftentimes when people institute a health behavior change program, they're very focused on participation metrics. Who signed up? Who submitted data? Who gave us, who did the blood test? Who did the biometric test? Those things are important, but they're not really engagement, and I believe that participation is really not the key to long-term behavior change. This is the Habit Summit, so I did want to just briefly touch explicitly on how engagement and habits work together. So at this point, again, many of the speakers have touched on habits and how they're formed, but one of the keys is that repetition plays a role here. You need to experience repeated exposure to a cue and reward in order for that behavior to really become ingrained, in order for that to become the program that your brain automatically runs. The way that that exposure happens is through engagement. So the prerequisite to engagement is motivation. And motivation, my favorite definition of it, is desire with velocity. It's not just wanting, it's wanting to do something. So I approach this from self-determination theory often, which is a really robust theory of motivation, comes out of the University of Rochester. If you're not familiar with it and want to learn more, they also keep a fantastic website, selfdeterminationtheory.org, where you can find many of the peer-reviewed papers and original research that went into this. But one of the things that comes from self-determination theory that I think is really critical when you think about engagement is that motivation is not about none or a lot. It's not about having how much. It's about what type of motivation you have. And so you can actually think about motivation as existing along a continuum. Over here on the controlled side, it starts with amotivated. This is your no motivation. I just have no desire to do this. It's not happening. And then next is external, or what sometimes is called extrinsic motivation. This happens when somebody offers you some sort of external reward or punishment for engaging in a behavior. And that can also be something like nagging. We see this a lot with health. It's, my wife gets really angry at me if I eat these fatty foods, or my doctor will be mad at me if I go in and talk about how much I've had to drink this week. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a reward or punishment in the sense that we think of it as like money or a gift. The next step along here, but still controlled, is introjected. And this is when you've taken that external nagging voice and you've brought it into your own head. This is when you're sitting there thinking, oh, I shouldn't do this. I know I shouldn't do this. This is bad. I feel like you see this a lot. We're all really good at internalizing the messages that society and our loved ones give us. And then they do drive a lot of our behavior, but it's a controlled form of motivation. Then we get over to the more autonomous types of motivation. So there's identified, and this is when somebody has a goal that is important to them, something that they value, and they see a behavior is consistent with that goal. Think about all of the hard work you may have done in your education, not because you really valued that particular class or felt excited by it, but because you knew it was really important to your ultimate goal of earning your degree or getting the job that you wanted. Then there's integrated. This is doing this as part of who I am. So, I'm going to do this because I am a good person. I believe in doing this sort of thing, and so it's just what I feel is morally right to do. And then finally, intrinsic motivation. I sometimes call this sex, drugs, and rock and roll motivation. I'm not totally convinced that you see it a lot in health because not a lot of the really healthy behaviors feel great to do in the moment. A lot of them provide the reward down the road. But intrinsic is when you're doing something just for its own sake. It feels great. When you think about engagement, what we really want is to get people towards this autonomous part of the continuum. That's where long-term change happens. And the simple reason for that is, you know that when you're trying to make any sort of behavior change, you're going to hit roadblocks. There will be temptations. There will be times when decisions are not easy for you to make. And the closer your source of motivation is to this controlled side of the spectrum, the more vulnerable it is to those challenges. So as designers, we need to think about creating experiences for our users that help them find their way over to the autonomous side of the motivation continuum. And the way we do that is by exercising these levers of motivation. So this all just comes from the idea, and several people have mentioned this already today, particularly around relatedness, but We have fundamental psychological needs as human beings. You think about this from classic motivational theories like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I will talk about that a little bit later. But they all posit this idea that no matter how different we are as human beings, we do have some things in common in terms of what we need psychologically. In the self-determination theory framework, those three common things are autonomy, and this is about being able to make your own meaningful choices. Underline meaningful. I've many times worked on products where people have said, oh, we let people customize the colors of the background and what their buttons look like. That's great, but that's not meaningful choice. Competence is this sense of learning and growth. So we've heard a little bit about this again today as well. But as human beings, we are constantly seeking opportunities to increase our skills and to grow and to know from cues in our environment that that's happening. And then finally, relatedness is this sense that we want to belong to something bigger than ourselves. We oftentimes think of this in terms of social relationships, one-to-one relationships, but it can be more than that too. It can be part of being part of the human community, being part of a religious community. We seek some sort of greater meaning from our lives. So what I'm going to talk about now is ways that you can bring each of these psychological needs to life through your design choices. So I'm going to try to bring it back down to a more concrete level. The first one I'm going to talk about is this perceived autonomy. So how do you help people feel they have control over meaningful choices in their lives? One of the first rules of thumb is shared rules of engagement. So think about informed choice. That word informed is really important. If you want somebody to make a decision, own that decision, and live with potentially difficult consequences of it, which happens even if it's a good decision. Something like saving money means that you're sacrificing things you could spend that money on. That can be a hard consequence for people. Same with health behaviors. If you're eating a salad, you're not eating a pizza, and that can be hard for people. So help people understand up front what decisions they're entering into so that they can own the outcomes. And what I have up here is research done by Emmy Solutions. They're a group that does patient education. And they talk to people who are about to have a colonoscopy, which is not a very pleasant experience, not something a lot of people enjoy doing, but really critical to preventing diseases and death. And some of the patients who are about to undergo colonoscopy receive this very patient-friendly, easy-to-understand education about what they were about to go through. And what they found is the people who went through that education not only reported having less of a difficult time with the procedure, they actually needed less medication during it, and the procedure took less time. So the fact that they walked into that decision anticipating some of the negative outcomes of it, that it was a completely informed decision, actually helped the outcome be better. You can think of behavioral reasons why that might be. Minimizing external pressure is also important. And if you think of that motivational continuum again, extrinsic motivation is something that a lot of companies will use to try to get participation in a program, but it really backfires in the long run in terms of engagement. There's a lot of neural evidence even that if you compensate people for something they might enjoy doing anyway, over time the pleasure centers of their brain are less responsive to that behavior. They won't do it anymore if they're not getting paid for it. Unfortunately, I think there's a lot of complicated cultural reasons why we might not be able to just say, don't incentivize people to do this. But to the extent that you can weigh in on that decision, thing number one is really try to calibrate reward amounts. Don't over-reward people for participating in something, because that just gets you into a spiral of having to pay more and more for the same behavior over time. And it's really counterproductive. Tying rewards to meaningful behaviors is another one. So Kevin Volpe has done some really great work with this with smoking cessation, where he said, all right, if you're going to give the reward, let's at least chunk it out so that people get $50 for signing up for the smoking cessation program, and then another $50 when they've been 6 weeks quit, and then another $50 when they're 6 months quit. So at least that way there's some sort of structure, and you're urging people to continue the behavior over time. The hope is that then the behavior will stick a little bit better and not just be so explicitly tied to the reward. And then finally, if you can do non-financial rewards whenever possible and make them relevant to the behavior, that's really helpful too. So think about, you want people to be part of an exercise program. Can you give them a discounted gym membership if they're doing a good job? MindBloom is a program where it does a really great job with autonomy because it gives you 2 different types of meaningful choice. You're given a seed and you can grow it into a tree. You earn water and sunshine to grow it. It first gives you a lot of choice in the beginning when you sign up. You can express your most personal values because you say what types of activities are going to make that seed grow into a tree. Is it your personal life, your relationships? Is it your financial life? Is it your physical health? And then you get a lot of choice within that. So if you do choose you want to work on your financial health, they give you a lot of structured choice around selecting goals and action steps that you can put into place to make that happen. So those are very meaningful choices. Another example, and this is something I struggle with often, or it's a challenge that I face in health behavior change. Sometimes there is a right answer to a problem. If you want to lose weight, this is your formula. You reduce your calories in, you increase your calories out, you get that balance of calories to a negative. However, you can offer people choice on how to achieve that. And so the images I have here are just two examples of programs that have done a really great job with that. The one on the bottom is the 21-day fix, where you get all the different colored containers, and you can fill them with any of the right type of food you want, but you can choose what goes in them. And then the one at the top is Weight Watchers, which is one of the most successful and long-lived weight loss programs in the United States. But again, a lot of choice with their point system. You can use all your points on brownie sundaes if you want. Another way that you can nudge people towards a better choice without forcing them to do this is by doing this sort of comparison. So this is from Runkeeper. And their goal, obviously, is to get you to buy the paid subscription rather than go with a free option. But you can emphasize the benefits of the preferred choice. If you look at the language here, it's really intended to show you what's good about paying. Showing what's missing, so the grayed out text is a great way to subtly indicate, hey, you're not getting this if you go with a free option. And then using the design to create the visual appeal. So the color gold is very appealing. There's more bold text here. These are really subtle cues that funnel people into the quote-unquote right choice while letting them feel like that choice is totally volitional. And then the final example that I'll use here, and I really like this one, is value-consistent framing. So figuring out what is important to that person. And again, think about, I talked about motivation where somebody has a goal that's important to them. If they perceive a behavior as advancing that goal, they're more motivated to do it. So if you're in a position to do this, you can either figure out or guess, because there is research that suggests that certain goals are very common. Most people value family, for example. But you can say things like, you say you value family, but you're smoking all these cigarettes, and it's really dampening your ability to play with your kids. Like, how do you explain that? And if you do that well, oftentimes that helps people start to make the shift in their thinking that, hey, this behavior isn't really what I want to do. Recently, I've become fascinated with a misapplication of this on the web. So you may have seen these sorts of examples when you get on a site. Give us your email. No thanks, I prefer to pay full price. No, I like to lose money. I reject my free issue. I don't want to run wild. I don't read. They're trying to do value-consistent framing. They are not succeeding. I collect these, by the way, so if you come across any great ones that you've taken a screenshot of, please send them my way. And then lastly, this is just a fun visual example of a way that you can make people feel like they have, not even make people feel, they do. They have truly autonomous choice here, but you nudge them toward the one that you want them to make. So this is, I believe, in Norway, trying to get people to use the stairs in the subway, and they put a working piano on the stairs, not on the escalator, and they found people are more likely to take the stairs, and they're going to enjoy it too. So really fun way, I thought, to add some autonomy guidance into an experience. So just as in a nutshell here, establish shared rules of engagement, minimize external pressure, provide meaningful choice. Perceived confidence, helping people feel like they can do it. So the first thing, and this may be obvious, but enhance user ability. BJ Fogg has a definition of ability that I love, which is that it's a function of whatever resource is the scarcest. So that might be time, it might be knowledge, it might be equipment, it might be patience. The list goes on and on. But if you can figure out what resources are scarce and then either design to avoid that or design to augment it, you'll be more effective. So just a couple of examples. Organ donation and 401k are actually similar examples. They come out of the Behavioral Economics School of Design, but where you make these things opt-outs instead of opt-ins. So in Europe, there are some places now where when you get your driver's license, you're automatically opted into organ donation. It's harder to opt out, so a lot of people don't do it, and as a result, a much greater percentage of the population is signed up to donate organs. 401k, there's been a lot of research now that shows that when that's made an opt-out, so you're automatically opted in unless you say otherwise, more people start saving for retirement earlier. And then the last year, this is a mammogram image, and this is another project that ME Solutions did, where they had automated phone calls go out to women whose doctors had recommended that it was time for them to have a mammogram. You know, they get the little message on the phone about it's time for a mammogram, and then at the end it said, do you want us to connect you to the scheduling department? When they had that prompt, when the women didn't have to look up another phone number, make another phone call, they were significantly more likely to follow through and make that appointment. So in that case, it was really augmenting their ability by not making it hard for them to do that. Feedback is another really great way to promote competence. And this is actually a working paper. It isn't even published yet, but I've been really interested in this research as it evolves. It was looking at airline pilots and the way that they pilot the plane, because there are decisions that a pilot can make to be more economical with fuel while in flight. And so they looked at a couple of conditions. They looked at one where they were just tracking. They looked at one where they were tracking and giving feedback. So, you know, here's the result, and you're also doing great. And then one where there was a personal target, so they would give people a goal to try to hit. And then lastly is charity donation, which was if you do well with your fuel economy, we'll give money to a designated charity. And what I think is really interesting about this is you do see that the feedback and the personal target have a little bit more effectiveness, but all four of these conditions, as soon as you know you're being watched, it's sort of like a sustainability Hawthorne effect here. People started to fly the plane more economically. So I thought this was a really interesting way to see how feedback can influence people's behavior. It starts to make you think about, well, how am I actually doing? But of course, another common example in health is with tracking. So fitness tracking and food diaries are really common, and more so as we get more sophisticated devices. But what these results here show basically is they do work in terms of increasing people's activity and reducing the calories they eat. There's been some controversy around whether fitness trackers really do work or not. You know, I've basically selected evidence here that says yes. I think we could have an interesting conversation about that. But the feedback does seem to have some effect on behavior. Even better, though, is if you make that normative feedback, if you let people know how their performance stacks up in light of other people's. So this example is from O-Power. They're a company that will take your utility bill and give you feedback on not just your own energy spending, but they compare it to others in your neighborhood and then to a subset of your most energy efficient neighbors. And so what they found in this particular study that Alcott did for them is that people who had this program instituted who were getting this bill were 1.4 to 3.3% less, using that much less energy. Doesn't sound like a lot, but if you think about it over the scope of a neighborhood, it's actually quite significant. And what's key here, they actually did early versions where they just told you how you were doing, and it wasn't until they added in the smiley faces over here that let you know, like, oh, no, that's actually good or not good. That was when they saw the changes in behavior. Multiple levels of feedback are also great. Video games do a great job of this. So this is Rock Band. 2 levels of feedback here. So you have your most proximal level of feedback. How are you doing with the notes? Are you hitting them on time? That's really important to let people know in the moment whether their behavior is hitting the mark or missing the mark. And it's really timely, too. So if you notice that you're a little bit slow, you can correct that for the very next note. And that's an important thing about feedback, too, is trying to offer it in a timely fashion. And then at the top, you have your more overarching feedback. So this is how are you doing over time? This is really important in health behavior change. For example, weight loss. Think of somebody who's doing pretty well with their weight loss. Then they go out, it's somebody's birthday, they have a huge slice of cake, and they think, oh, well, I'm off the wagon. If you can remind them, well, no, you're not. You ate really well the last 12 days in a row, and you're down 5 pounds. If you can reorient them to the longer-term feedback, that can really help to undo the damage from a shorter-term failure. So having that feedback at multiple levels can be really helpful in motivation and building a sense of competence. This example has been around a lot. If you've read the book Nudge, it's in there. But adding the fly decal in the urinal has apparently really greatly helped to increase men's aim and improve cleanliness in restrooms. And you can buy them on Amazon. So I liked this screenshot from Amazon because it says here, 80% cleaner bathrooms in minutes. I have no idea who is measuring this. And they have ones, too, that are color changing. So, but that's feedback. That is feedback. Oh, there's a fly. Badges. You see badges all the time as a form of feedback. These are from Foursquare, now Swarm. And they're just very popular because they're very easy to use, easy to implement. I cannot tell you how many times I've been talking with a client and they say, oh, can we add badges? Badges and leaderboards? Well, maybe if you do it right. So this is the third-party health badges from Foursquare. They retired them in 2012, and I just love this quote from Scott Rigby. He is a researcher in self-determination theory, and he specifically does a lot of work on video games and what makes them have such a pull over their users. But he says, one reported reason for ending these badges is precisely what we'd predict. Users began to game the system, looking to circumvent the health behaviors simply to get the badge. That's going and standing outside the gym and checking in instead of going in, using the treadmill and checking in. And that's what happens a lot of times with badges because they're not really tied to the behavior that you're trying to change. Starbucks, it's not badges exactly, but it operates under a similar mechanic. Their mobile app, as you buy coffee, it puts stars in your cup. And then over time, those stars turn into something that's actually really meaningful for encouraging the behavior that Starbucks wants from you, which is they want you to drink more coffee. So you get enough of these badges and you get more coffee. This has been an enormously successful app. I update these statistics as often as I remember to do it, but 22% of transactions that Starbucks did in December of 2015 were done on this app. And these go up every single time I check. So this is a very successful one because the reward is tied to the behavior that they're trying to encourage. And then what if is a really useful way to build competence as well. So if I'm going to change my behavior, I want to know what the outcome of that might be. This is a really simple spreadsheet called the Snowball Debt Calculator. If you are paying off your student loans, I really recommend it. I used it to pay off mine. But it helps you experiment with, if you have a certain number of dollars per month, where do you put it to have the biggest impact on your overall debt? And you can play out different scenarios and decide what's right for you. And then the other one here is a cardiovascular disease calculator where you can see if I quit smoking, if I lost weight, if I exercised more, what would these do to my cardiovascular risk? So these help people gauge what their behavior change might actually do for them. Task order matters, so if you think about something like a survey, but it doesn't have to be a survey, if it's a time-consuming and draining task, start with the hard stuff and leave the easy stuff for last when people have minimal brain power. Put your demographic stuff at the end of the survey. Everybody knows that I don't need to think about it. But if it's a learning or growth-oriented task, go easy to hard because the skills that you need to do the easy things may be developed over time so that you're ready by the time you get to the hard things. And an example of that is Duolingo. Online language learning platform, but it structures the lessons to go from easy to hard. You can test out if you're above a certain level, so you don't have to go through mind-numbingly boring tasks. But it really helps you to achieve a certain level, and I believe, yeah, I do. So there's 3 different ways it gives you feedback to it. It shows you your progression through the levels, it shows you your points earned, and it shows you how you stack up to your friends. So it does a really nice job of those levels of feedback. And then does it work? They did a study that showed, yes, it does. One semester at the university, which I calculated based on my experience taking an intro level is 105 hours at least of just class time, is equal to 34 hours on Duolingo. So then lastly is perceived relatedness, showing people that they're connected and giving them that sense of belonging. So I mentioned before, early motivational theories understood that this was a key part of human functioning and well-being. The Harlow studies, classic social psychological studies that showed that when baby monkeys were taken away from their mothers, they would cling to this uncomfortable wire mannequin because they were so hungry for affection. It's horrible studies, but really informative. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I mean, right in the middle, love and belonging, one of the core needs that we need before we can be self-actualized. And then more recently, Jeff Williams, who I believe is now at Yale University, created this game, which is called Cyberball. And you can see that little hand at the bottom, that's you, that's the player. And what happens when you play this game is the other 2 players ignore you after a while. And what Williams found is even when he told people that those other 2 players were controlled by the computer, their mood plummeted. They felt angry. They felt isolated. Even knowing that's fake, that has an incredible effect on our mood because we are so programmed to want that social acceptance in that relationship. Social technology, obviously, and the wheel over here on the right, the conversation prism, that's another one that's probably way out of date already, even though it's fairly recent. But actual social networking is a way that you can help people feel related, that you can help them feel that sense of relationship. And it's something that a lot of people cling to because it's easy to think about. There are a lot of established channels that you can use. But one thing that's important if you do it is that you actually are responsive with it. And you can do that either by being reactive or proactive. But don't just throw out a Facebook page and never monitor it and never interact with people, because that is demotivating. That shows that there is no relationship. And again, people are sensitive to that. So here with reactive, this is an example from Boston Organics, but they get a complaint. They're monitoring their Twitter feed, and they say, I'm sorry to hear that. How can I help? Proactive, a lot of brands are doing this better and better, but they look for keywords that are related to their product or their service, and they reach out even when somebody isn't necessarily looking to talk to them. So here, we have a few Meatless Monday recipes up on the blog. Nice way to build a relationship. Normative feedback. So I mentioned this in terms of competence, but it's also important in terms of feeling related, because especially, again, with health, you want to know that you're not alone. You want to know that you're not the only person who's struggling or who has a long journey to go down. But it's a delicate balance. So this is an example from smoking cessation. I mentioned that before. And one thing that's really powerful for some, hopefully soon to be ex-smokers to realize, is that quitting is hard and people fail at it. But you have to be careful how you tell them that, because what you want them to hear is people fail and they eventually succeed, and you will too. You don't want them to hear people fail and so it's okay, don't even bother. It's a really delicate balance. Personalization is a way that builds a relationship. I think we've heard a lot about this today. It's something that I'm really passionate about, thinking about how to do better. But when a technology evolves to meet our needs and to greet us with what we're looking for, we start to feel that sense of relatedness. We start to feel like this sees me and this understands me. So whether this is the Google One app, which I absolutely love on my phone, tells me how my stocks are doing and how my sports teams are doing and how long it's going to take me to get home from where I am, to Siri, to Alexa, to, I use the OK Google on my phone. So all these things are really helpful in building a relationship through technology. Amazon, of course, when it predicts the products that you might like. I use this example a lot because I actually don't buy a lot of kitchen stuff on Amazon. When we got married, we had our registries. We got all the kitchen stuff we could ever need. But somewhere along the way, Amazon nonetheless figured out that I have all the red KitchenAid stuff, and it's always suggesting it to me. And I do. I feel like it knows me, even though that's a little creepy because I don't buy this stuff there. Everything is better with friends. So if you connect people to their real life social network through your product, that's also a powerful way to build that sense of connection. These are just two examples that I personally use that I really like that network with. So one is Goodreads. You can see what your friends are reading. You can comment on it. They can see what you've read. You can make book recommendations to each other. It takes this traditionally solo and offline activity and adds in this nice social element. And then Fitbit is another one, and they did another study. I do have a sneaking suspicion it's the same stat as it is for wearing a fitness tracker at all, and I double-checked to make sure. 27% more active if you have friends. Apparently also 20% more active if you just have one in the first place. So just interesting that it's the same number. So in terms of relatedness support, it's really this communicating warmth, conveying a sense of involvement, and then conveying that belongingness. You're part of something bigger than yourself. So when you're thinking about designing to help people build habits, it is important that you think of as well about how do I build this experience so that people want to engage in it time and again, so that they get that exposure so that the habits actually develop. And I think that's it. Thank you.